Well, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Marco Rosario Rossi. I am the Executive Director for Washingtonians for Public Banking. For those who aren't aware of our organization and are interested in finding out more, I'm going to put the link to our website in the chat for everyone to see, so you can look us up. We are an organization that promotes public banking in Washington State at all levels of government. And I'm very excited for this evening as part of our virtual town halls, which we are organizing on a bi-monthly basis. So every 2 months, you can expect an event from our organization to educate people about banking here in the United States and what we can do to make a more prosperous, equal, and democratic economy. So I'm very happy to introduce our two guests for today. Our first guest, Alphecca Muttardy, is a former economist with the International Monetary Fund who specialized in the economies of Ghana and Liberia. Muttardy's well-sought-after expertise has meant that she's a regular advisor to civic groups and lawmakers, having testified on the virtues of public banking before numerous state legislators and city councils throughout the United States. Our second guest is Walt McRee. He's the co-chair of the Public Banking Institute, who has worked with public banking groups around the country for the past dozen years, including foundational work in Washington State and here in Seattle. He currently produces and co-hosts a radio podcast, It's Our Money, with Ellen Brown on the Progressive Radio Network, as well as hosts the Public Banking Solutions online TV series. So we're going to start with a presentation from Alphecca, then we'll move to Walt. And at the end, we'll have time for questions from all of you who've attended. So I'm going to hand it to Alphecca.
Great. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you this evening to talk about how we can. Eric, you might need to mute. Thank you. How we can promote public banking, and then specifically how we can repair our infrastructure across the nation, and also repair our economy at the same time, since all of these things are linked together. I'm a macroeconomist. I worked for 25 years at the International Monetary Fund, so I see that this is a little bit bigger than a banking picture, but it's also an investment picture, and it's also very much a macroeconomic picture as well. So what I'd like to do today is to explain to you about a proposal and a piece of legislation in Congress to create a national bank, how that bank will work, and also how it will really jumpstart the economy and solve a lot of our problems with our current banking system that has gone a little bit off course on account of Federal Reserve policies to try and tamp down on inflation, which are breaking things as we go along. So I will walk you through a slide deck on how this proposal works. I will send a copy of the slide deck to Mario so he can send it, post it if anybody's interested in having the slide deck in addition to the recording this evening. So the bill that we have in Congress is HR 4052. What the bill does is it creates a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country. So why do we need one of those? Because we're simply just not able to finance infrastructure adequately, either through the federal budget, state and local budgets, private capital markets. None of that is working. And now we have a big backlog of projects that we need to get fixed and new projects that we need to start. And the idea is this bank will complement budgets and provide all of the financing that's needed to fix everything. Currently, this legislation has 19 co-sponsors, including the main sponsor, Danny Davis from Illinois. The way that we've brought on a lot of these co-sponsors onto the legislation is by going to state and local legislators and talking with them about their unmet infrastructure needs and explaining to them how this bill can do a workaround, a budget workaround to finance everything. And then we all go to their members of Congress to make the plea for signing on to the bill. And that's been very successful in bringing on these 19 co-sponsors. But we are still continuing to add co-sponsors, and we are seeking everybody's help. This is very much a grassroots effort to get our members of Congress to sign on to the bill. The objective right now in this current budget crisis, which I'll explain a little bit about, is to get as many co-sponsors on the bill as we can, so we raise the transparency of the bill, higher as a possible workaround for how we can solve our budget crisis and our banking crisis at the same time. This idea of a public bank to supplement budgets, to finance infrastructure during times like today when we have high fiscal deficits and we can't do this financing through the budget, has been done successfully 4 times before in our nation's history, starting after the American Revolutionary War and going through the Great Depression and World War II. These banks aren't generally around anymore, but they were very successful because they had a 20-year sunset clause in them. But they were very successful and built large chunks of our nation's infrastructure, like the Transcontinental Railroad under Abraham Lincoln, like the Colorado River Project that feeds water and electricity into 7 states in the Midwest. A lot of schools were built with this, water systems and those kind of things all across the country. In fact, there's a map of where the Reconstruction Finance Corporation built projects in every single county in the United States. So this proposal for a 5th bank is modeled on those earlier 4. This is just a real quick description of how the bank works. Instead of going to the budget and asking for money to get this bank capitalized, with capital is the collateral, of course, that sits on the bank's books and backstops any loans that the bank gives out. Instead of going to the budget and asking for that money, we go to the private sector, who are holding about $26 trillion in treasuries, and ask, would they like to sell in a small portion of them into the NIB in exchange for preferred stock that'll pay investors a little extra? That's the enticement for the investors to invest into the bank. And that extra stream of money comes out of interest earnings from the NIB's loans, with plenty of money left over for other operational needs. That is, this bank is self-sustaining and doesn't require infusions from any budget to subsidize its operations over time. So that adequately capitalizes the bank. We want to lend out $5 trillion, so we need about 1/10 of that in capital sitting on the books. That adequately capitalizes the bank. This describes how the bank gives out a loan. That process works exactly the same as any commercial deposit-taking bank. Even though this is a bank that is government-owned and only lends for infrastructure, in the operational field, it operates just like a commercial bank. What that means is that every time the NIB books and creates a loan on one side of its books, its accounting software actually opens a new deposit on the other side of its books to balance. Whenever you do that, you're adding to the nation's money supply. So those of you who know banking really well know that 95% of America's money supply was created by commercial deposit-taking banks at exactly the time that they gave out a loan. This bank is no different. And then it uses cash on hand coming in from other things to circulate money out of this new deposit into the rest of the banking system. So that's how the loan process works. The loan terms are very advantageous around the Treasury bond rate for interest charged and flexible repayment terms. And then borrowers would be state and local governments, any public entity that owns a bit of public infrastructure, a county, a city, for a road, a bridge, a school that it hasn't been able to get financed by other means, can come in directly to the NIB to request a loan. We cover $5 trillion in projects in 20 infrastructure categories. 16 of those categories are routinely monitored by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Every few years, they come up with a report card and a new estimate of how much extra money do we need to fix things. This is their latest estimates for repairing transportation systems, water systems, upgrading the electric power grid. We added a few categories we also think are critical and need to be covered by the bank: a complete high-speed rail network all around the country to solve traffic congestion problems, increase efficiencies, lower CO2 emissions, that kind of thing. Broadband everywhere, nationwide, rural, urban, and affordable. Affordable housing, 7 million units targeted to the very lowest income earners who need them the most. And we got this estimation of need from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They have stats on every single state and how many affordable housing units are needed in those states. And then some large-scale water projects to address drought in the Southwest, where we grow half of our nation's farm-to-table food. So here is what the NIB will provide, again, expressed in billions of dollars in each one of the specific 20 categories, to compare it to the bipartisan law that passed 2 years ago. You can see that's providing only about 1/10 of all the new additional money we need for everything. It means that every single state, including Washington's no exception, will not be able to get out of this bill everything it needs for roads, bridges, transit, water infrastructure systems, very short and amount of money supplied, and affordable housing and high-speed rail are not even included in this bill. So we're going to need the NIB to top up, provide the other 90% of the financing still missing from the picture. So not only can we fix all of the infrastructure this way, but we can really supercharge the American economy. This is where the macro picture kind of comes in. The construction will create up to 25 million new great paying jobs. The legislation requires that workers be paid high prevailing or Davis-Bacon wages. That'll go a long way to resolving the income inequality in the United States and the fact that the lower 40% of the population is really struggling right now. With higher rents, higher food prices, they can't pay for medicine. This is really straining on them, as I'll point out in just a minute. And this will solve that problem to a great degree. It'll also, the Buy America Only provision for the construction inputs means we can reshore manufacturing as well, build everything in the United States that we need for this construction. We can double our GDP growth, twice what it has been historically. And it'll provide equitable growth that will seep down into the very detailed areas in the country. All this with no new federal taxes, spending, or debt. This legislation and the bank operations will not impact the federal budget at all. It'll pay for everything. It's a budget workaround, but it will not raise the deficit at all. It'll also reduce inflation, works on the supply side, and brings prices down when you have more supply of goods, and offset any coming recession. So I just wanted to point out, to maybe give you a quick rundown on where we are with the economy, because it's kind of the backdrop for where we are with the banking system as well. The economy right at this moment doesn't look too bad. In the third quarter of this year, growth was 4.9%. That's this column right here on the bar chart. That's not too bad. It was held up, buoyed up by consumer demand. Lots of folks are out there spending on vacations. They had a good summer. These are mostly high income people who are spending on services and things like that, and that kept the economy buoyed. But it might not last. We have a tight labor market. Unemployment is around 3.9%. It popped up a little bit in September, but that doesn't mean the economy is recession-proof exactly. And we have the labor market is softening a little bit. So new hires and voluntary quits, all that stuff is slowing down a little bit, but we have huge high income inequality. Again, the lower 40% of the population is not doing well. Inflation is not too bad. It is running around. It softened a little bit in October to 3.2%. It's not where the Fed wants it. Rents were the highest contributor to that. And there's a lot of people getting evicted, a lot of people living in their cars. I understand that they cleaned up in San Francisco a lot of the homeless shelters for the APEC convention, but we don't have a permanent solution for our housing crisis. 30-year mortgages are now around 8%. That's slamming the housing market for new and existing homes. And the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates, the short-term interest rates fixed at around 5.5% in November, but they keep on watching everything. And it's not out of the question that they could raise them again if we can't bring this inflation rate down to their target of 2%. And small businesses are facing a lot of problems because they're facing borrowing rates of around 9%. They've slammed on the brakes. They're not borrowing from banks right now. They're not investing in their business or expanding operations, and they may conceivably have trouble of financing the debt they already have. Commercial banks' profitability is upside down. I'll talk about more of this in a minute, but we've got draining deposits out of banks and commercial real estate deteriorating. 1 trillion of that coming due again. That'll have to be refinanced in the next 5 years and at these high rates. Moody's, Fitch, and S&P have downgraded a lot of these banks and may downgrade more. So altogether on the macro picture, a survey in October among economists, they have now moderated their forecast, changing it from a recession in 2024 to maybe a soft landing in 2024. However, That may be overly optimistic because we still have leading indicators, economic indicators, all pointing downward. Manufacturing is slumping, bank lending is slumping, retail spending is slowing down. Just today, wholesale prices came out. They're falling back. That means there's not demand. All of these things, cooling labor market, all of these things point to a possible slowdown in the economy.
A bunch of other stuff.
So that's where we are in the economy. Now, there are two things on the macro. One is the fact that the government provides a lot of stimulus to the economy, especially when we have a recession. You saw that during the COVID recession when they spent $5 trillion over 2 years to dig us out of that COVID recession. We popped out really quickly, but it was not a Goldilocks moment. Maybe we spent too much. But that's one source of coming out of a recession. And then the monetary side is a second source that'll pull us out of a recession. So where are we if we slip into one? On the budget side, we are in contraction mode already. The budget is getting smaller because some of the things that were enacted during COVID are now expiring, like the child care tax credits, child care grants that go for daycare centers. When people can't get daycare facilities for their children, then they can't work. Stimulus for new small businesses, all of that is expiring. So that's pointing downward. In addition, we're in a budget crisis because we have $33 trillion in debt right now, which is really high. That's above a year's worth of gross domestic product output. And this year, our deficit is expected to be $2 trillion. And that's very unusual during a period of high growth like we saw in that third quarter. So the House GOP is concerned about all this. They want to cut spending. They have not been able to agree on a budget. Yesterday, they voted positively for a continuing resolution to kick the can down the road, essentially, come back to it and try and renegotiate a budget in January and February. But they still are very far apart on what should be in this budget. As a result of all that, Moody's has lowered the outlook for the U.S. debt from stable to negative. And when that happens, then oftentimes long-term interest rates go up even higher, which adds more to the debt because we have to pay interest on the debt, which is rising. The NIB is a budget workaround for the budget crisis. And how does that work? Because it works off budget. It does all the lending for the infrastructure projects, doesn't affect the budget whatsoever. And then it no need for new spending, taxes, or deficits. Again, it's an independent public bank, and it's big enough to cover everything. It can offset any recession. If anybody becomes unemployed, we can quickly hire them up in apprenticeship programs to build affordable housing, to fix our roads and bridges, all these kind of things, and get them into family-sustaining, long-term jobs that'll be an improvement for their families. It's this $5 trillion that the NIB will provide is big enough to move the needle on the economy and increase growth rates. So that's how it solves the budget crisis. Now, Bidenomics is not quite there. It's not doing the job. We've had a big concern among Democrats, for example, over this recent poll from the New York Times and Siena College about where voters are on the economy. They are favoring Trump versus Biden in 5 out of 6 swing states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. And what they're honing in on is the economy. They're struggling to make ends meet. Their wages are not rising as fast as the inflation is, and they're having trouble paying for everything. So it's really and it's exacerbated by the housing crisis. And there's no other way to pay for more affordable housing than through this National Infrastructure Bank. So the 3 acts that have been passed so far, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is the bipartisan bill, the IRA, which is the climate bill, and the CHIPS bill to promote, chips manufacturing. All of these are great starts, but they're too small. And even the infrastructure czar, Mitch Landrieu, has admitted that these are only a start. We need to vastly expand our investment in infrastructure. And then finally, there are a lot of voters who say that they're really having trouble with skyrocketing rent and feeling that they've been left behind, higher prices of things, and members of Congress are not listening to them. And progressive congresswomen like Pramila Jayapal have called for enhancing policies to reduce poverty and address the needs of many of these working families. So that's how we work on this on the budget side. Now, the banking crisis, that's the next problem. The banking crisis, in my view, has been caused essentially by Federal Reserve policies trying to tamp down on inflation. They raised short-term interest rates from 0 to 5.5%. They're cutting the money supply. This is something called quantitative tightening. Both of those to fight inflation. What they want to do is tamp down on demand so that people won't go and buy things, so the prices will come down. However, this has adversely affected all banks' operations. Deposits are fleeing from banks because they're seeking higher rates of return in the non-bank sector. This happened to Silicon Valley Bank at the beginning of this year when it saw its deposits just flowing out of the building, and there was actually a run on the bank. And finally, they also suffer from poor risk management. But finally, the regulators came in, closed the bank, and arranged for the bank to be bought by another big bank, which will increase competition and increase costs in banking operations. So that's not been a good thing. We need to make sure that we have a vibrant system of regional and local banks to provide the lending capability that our economy needs to run on. Not only did the interest rates affect banks' operations, but so did the fact that the U.S. Treasury was sucking out another $1 trillion from the banking system in liquidity to meet its deficit. And then finally, the bonds were lowering in price because their interest rates were going up, and they're sitting on the bank's books. So that means a big chunk of what's on the bank's books is falling in value, and that's affecting its operations. So altogether, for all of those reasons, a lot of those banks had been downgraded by the rating agencies. And then regional banks also have another problem of high concentration of real estate loans, with lots of empty offices in many cities, and bankruptcies on these infrastructure loan of these commercial real estate loans, which is affecting the ability of the bank's operations too. And as I said, many of these loans will be falling due over the next 5 years. They'll have to be refinanced at higher rates. That means that those real estate entities might not be able to service their loans, and we might have more bankruptcies on account of all that, which will hit banks' books. So what does the NIB do? It can help to offset all of this because it is lending for a specific purpose. It is lending into the economy for infrastructure projects, which will create demand for all sorts of things throughout the economy. And it can act counter-cyclically to whatever's happening. If there's a downturn in the economy, it can keep on creating a source of financing and demand for these infrastructure projects to push against a dwindling economy, and it'll hire up the unemployed again for these great paying jobs. So there will be lots coming out of the infrastructure lending process and construction work. There'll be lots of secondary lending opportunities for banks because, for example, if a county comes in for a project and the NIB lends to them, they will go through their procurement process. They will go out to the market and ask for proposals to do the construction work for this project that the NIB is financing. And then those construction companies will go out and hire workers. They will buy products to do the construction. They'll hire engineering firms. All those kind of things will then need lending support behind it, which the commercial bank operations can provide the lending for. So that's the secondary lending opportunity for banks. And we see a big role between the NIB to complement and partner with either state public banks or local banks or the bond market for all of these operations that the NIB will finance. And how does that work? the NIB would be financing the part that has not been financed by private capital markets, or local budgets can't afford to finance it. We'll be financing that. And then they'll be financing other indirect projects, which they can take on a part of the loan. The big part could go on the NIB's books, and a smaller part could go on the local bank's books. The local bank can even act as a storefront, for example, for the NIB. Its loan officers can talk to prospective customers who want to take a loan, prospective counties or local governments, and help them to process the loan and assist tracking the loan execution for a service fee, for example. So there are lots of different ways that this partnership can work, not to mention the indirect business opportunities, which will be considerable, because when you're spending $5 trillion over 10 years, you're vastly raising the demand for all of these projects to sort of grease the wheels in the economy. And there are historical examples for this. During the Great Depression, all of the banks happened to be closed. There was no lending going on, and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation became the lender of last resort. But it was huge. It was bigger than all the commercial banks combined, bigger than the government budget combined, and did all this lending for building big projects and small ones all across. In 2 years, they had projects in every single county in the United States. They built schools, they built art projects, they built dams, they built all these wonderful things. And many of them were investments in poor areas. For example, 80% of America was not electrified. And the Reconstruction Finance Corporation wanted to electrify that, started the rural electrification program. Everybody said, don't lend to them, and they'll never be able to pay you back. Well, it happened that because their operations became much more profitable, farms bought pumps and milking machines and all these other kind of things. The revenue from the farms went up, and they were able to repay back the loans. And even some of the farmers were hired as electricians to run the wires and run the wiring in their own homes. So those are all examples of how this can really jumpstart the economy and improve the life for everyday Americans. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions during the question and answer period. But do feel free. These are my ideas on how I think that there could be collaboration and opportunities for both local banks, private state public banks, and local banks, and even normal capital markets during this very difficult time that we may be going into, and it could be getting worse as the year goes on. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I just want to remind people, if you have questions, just hold on to them. We'll get everyone an opportunity to answer the questions at the very end. And now I want to welcome Walt for the second half of this presentation.
Okay. Well, thank you. I was feeling pretty good until I heard from Alphecca, who really laid out the whole laundry list of the things that need to be cleaned up. But I must say, very exciting to hear what a difference a public bank could make in an economy like ours, regardless of what the condition of it is. This NIB, the National Infrastructure Bank project, is enormously exciting. We at the Public Banking Institute are very supportive of it for obvious reasons. But we think that it's the kind of cultural almost breakthrough and governmental breakthrough that will allow the people to be more in charge of helping to get our economy geared toward public service and to be able to finance it instead of having to rely on some of the problems that we find in the banking system itself. So I am delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, Marco, and my friends in Washington. I have lots of relatives and friends there, so it's nice to be back in town, so to speak. Marco gave me a topic of America's regional banking crisis, concerns and opportunities for the American economy, and I thought, man, that's a topic written by an academic, and and a good one, a big one. I feel like it could be a doctoral treatise or maybe a thesis for me to work on. And I don't know that I'm really qualified to address it all, depending upon how you look at what this topic is about. I did find some important touchstones that I wanted to share with you about this vis-a-vis public banking, vis-a-vis banking itself. And I think it's a great topic to discuss because we find ourselves living in an environment of monetary control run by others, okay? So this is a very expansive opportunity for us to talk, and I'm just going to give you some thoughts as I see it and as we see it from what's wrong. What kind of crises are we talking about? Now, Marco suggested that a regional banking crisis should be a focus. And well, I'm not an expert on regional banking issues. I think Alphecca touched on some of them relative to being, let's say, overinvested in commercial real estate as being a possible sector of trouble for banks. I think that the problem with the crises that I see in our banking system is systemic on a much larger level. So when I said, okay, let's take a look at what the word crisis means, and I even went to the dictionary. I always thought that, maybe I have my understanding wrong, right? But the dictionary really nailed it. It says a crisis is a condition of instability or danger, as in social, economic, political, or international affairs, leading to a decisive change. And I said, that's the hook right there, because there is plenty of evidence of a crisis in banking. It can be seen in a lot of different portals, through a lot of different economic portals, like inflation or failing banks, excesses in the financial investing world, injustices in social realities, etc. It's quite a long list, but the problem is clear. Our monetary system and the private banks that execute it are fundamentally extractive and exploitive by design. And that, I think, is where the crisis comes, because banking's business model is to lay claim to or create the money that's circulating in the economy through debt obligations and public and private deposits, pension funds, with a huge repository of public funds there, speculative investments like derivatives and many more speculative sort of shots of investing, and of course, then the banks set the terms for their recovery of that credit with their interest rates and fiduciary positioning and their outsized political and policy influence. All of them focused on maximizing profits and the civic power that results from those profits. So essentially, money is being managed for us as a commodity. And of course, it is a commodity. But I think there's an important, different view for us at this time in our civic history that to consider. And it's quite different and operates at a different level of civic reality. And namely, that money is a public utility needed and deserved by all community members. So it's a tool of civic and interpersonal relationships. It's a tool for generating productivity and securing the safety and the health, the good prospects for all elements of society. Now, as we know, not everybody has money in our system. But these ideals, nonetheless, are really at the core of the drive to create public banks. This is a drive to transform our monetary system toward public service and responsible government and responsible relationships across the community, to democratize our money, to create a public option for our money, which can bring transparency and accountability to the table in the public's interest. And in that matrix of public interest investing, where the opportunities for a reformed and transformed monetary system lie is our question. So let's divert our glance here for a moment from public interest and take a look at how interest itself helps to create some of the economic crises that we're referring to. Give me just a minute here while I arrange to be able to slide to share my screen here. I couldn't do this when we were with Alphecca, but there you go. I take it you can see this. We're talking about interest now. A prime example of how the extractive component of interest in our monetary and banking system affects all aspects of our lives is the extraction of interest charged across virtually all the elements of the economy in one form or another. Back in 2014, there was an economist by the name of Margaret Kennedy, a German economist who researched the scale and the impact of interest on consumers, and discovered that basically a third of everything we buy goes to interest. And of course, then that interest goes to private banks, which create the money as debt, a debt for which more money is always required to come back. And that, of course, is fundamentally an inflationary component. I think it's also true, it also has precipitated a growing and vast financial system of financialization of our economy, where more money can be made by speculating on paper, again, being driven in part by the interest component, than a productive economy, which is what Alphecca was really referring to when we talk about building infrastructure, highly productive, good jobs, a long-lasting investment in our neighborhoods, our towns, and our cities, not fly-by-night sort of profits that are basically paper-based. And of course, this final note here about how much money has left our country out of these expansive payoffs in the financial market. Trillions and tens of trillions of dollars have now left that. Another way of looking at this, another way of looking at the cost of infrastructure, of course, is that so much of our infrastructure has been going to, the cost of infrastructure has been going to payments of interest. So we used to refer to the Bay Bridge in Oakland and San Francisco. That cost was doubled because it was the financing costs just resulted in that over 20 years. So if that's a factor for public finance, then having a public bank where the financing can come from our own ability to extend credit would, of course, save that prospect. The state of Washington certainly has plenty of money that it could put into the game. But as this little slide here is from my colleague at PBI, from Ellen Brown, who just points out that the state may have a lot of money, as it does, as I think Bob Hasegawa said, money stashed between the seat cushions in a lot of different ways in the government larder. But county and local funds, public pension funds, which, as you say, are very sizable, and to $15 billion at that time, probably about 2017, in the government investment pool. But there's a problem, and that is that the state doesn't have access to using this money as it would like, because they have to have liquidity. They have to be able to pay their budget. They have to be able to have short-term expenses. They're not able to use this money or free it for a long-term lending. So that is where public banks come in. That's the spot where having a public bank or any sort of a bank will allow you to take short-term money and lend it long. You take deposits and you put it into much longer investment dollars. So what else is the problem with our banking system? We have some really wonderful reporters, and I say we, but nationally there are Pam and Russ Martins, who write a newsletter called Wall Street on Parade. They are Wall Street veterans themselves, but they write that another problem that we've got with banking is that beyond specific areas of panic, the banking system is consistently being undermined by a steady stream of illegal, predatory, dishonest, and deceitful behavior, which blatantly harms the American people, particularly the most vulnerable members of our communities. The frequency and severity of cases against the largest banks in the country for engaging in this conduct is a trust killer for the public. And so that is one of the crises that we have as well. This chart here shows the level of unlawful acts committed by the largest Wall Street banks, reaching nearly 500 over the last 10, 12 years. These are billions of dollars. But the graphic reports that almost there are 500 matters or more amounting to about $200 billion in fines and settlements that have been widely reported and are visible to the American public. One of our, this is one of our important pieces of infrastructure, our banks. So we see banks breaking the law repeatedly, never really getting meaningfully punished. They see these puny fines that are kind of built into the cost of doing business, and they get bailed out. And of course, their executives also get the bonuses. We all know that that horrible history of how the Wall Street banks, the big banks, have behaved. And so that too is part of the crisis that we see in banking, and why a public bank having more regional or state-based banks will allow us to prevent that. The bottom line on this aspect of it really was best said, I think, by Bill Black, who's an author, a former bank regulator, banking analyst, who said the best way to rob a bank is to own one. And that, of course, has been proven in many, many times. So now we can stop flogging our crisis-driven banking system here with a little bit with this comment from Wall Street on Parade. They say, until corporate and Wall Street billionaire funding. Sorry, guys, excuse me for a second. Says, until corporate and Wall Street billionaire funding of political campaigns is outlawed by congressional legislation, and until Wall Street's revolving door is slammed shut, until the U.S. president stops nominating and the Senate stops confirming partners at Wall Street's law firms to run the U.S. Department of Justice, this is the corrupt, predatory banking system that every American will be forced to attempt to navigate. That's Russ and Pam Martins. So there you go. There we have our crises laid out, just some of the crises. And really, there are many, many aspects that I'm not touching on here. But I think that we see that we have a compromised fundamental public utility, that is the institution of banking. Again, we don't mean to suggest that all banks are corrupt here at all, or even that the nature of banking is fundamentally corrupt. Far from it. It is not that at all. We think that banking is, which is basically the extension of credit to others, is a brilliant civic invention and a civic institution, and that community banks and credit unions play really crucial roles in building community strength. They have nothing to do with the sort of behavior that I just mentioned is so common, or that we've gotten used to on Wall Street. But the problem with community banks and credit unions is that their numbers are falling. There are fewer community banks now by a lot than there used to be a few years ago. And credit unions, which, while they're growing, are also, neither of those have very big, have the kind of significant capital strength that allow them to take on some of the projects that Alphecca referred to, for example, although she did say that the National Infrastructure Bank would use these financing arms, these existing financial institutions, to execute and to use some of the money to build the infrastructure that we have that we so desperately need to work on. So, all right, I've got to go back to share my screen here a minute, guys. Let me, this is not very easy for me to do somehow. This comment is from a new page or a new paper done by law professors Morgan Ricks and Dr. Lev Menand of Yale and Columbia, I believe, or Cornell and Columbia. It's called Rebuilding Banking Law, and it describes the structural and policy failings that keep the old system locked in place. And you can see what they say here. The money and banking system is broken. The Federal Reserve and the government has to step in all the time to prevent it from collapsing altogether. And it seems that because of the way things are wired, that it will continue to be like that, because regulators often have no choice but to prop up this failing and failed and again a corrupt system when it outspends and when it does imprudent things. They say that these gentlemen say that we propose the best way to achieve a transformation is to treat depository banks as public utilities. And of course, we're talking about utilities tonight with the NIB. That's exactly what this is. Depository banks are utilities. It's a service that, just like electricity and water and telecommunications companies, it is something that we have to take seriously as we look at planning and how to work around. Now, we know that the word is getting around about public banks, and transforming the banking into public service utility is really the way it was designed. Congress originally designed our banking laws along public utility principles. But with the deregulatory craze that's been going on for the last 50 years, many provisions that ensured a stable and accessible money supply, like the Glass-Steagall Act, for example, provisions that prevented too big to fail bailouts and excessive risk-taking, have been either watered down or repealed. So that is, I'm going to have to stop this here, I think. All right. So that's part of the scene. Under this 21st century approach, everyone should have a bank account. They shouldn't be worrying about getting hit by predatory fees. They shouldn't have to pay to transfer their money quickly. There should be an easy, a facile way for their money to work for them rather than being taken away from by way of bank operations, okay? So our crisis-driven banking system has been largely responsible for undermining the local commerce insofar as big banks are not interested in funding small business lending. It's not on their screen so much anymore. The process has been driving unfair inequalities that we all are familiar with, like redlining of neighborhoods, which is still continuing, citing of toxic and undesirable or intrusive neighborhood developments, that continues, damaging the environment, as we could give several examples of that, funding fossil fuels, etc. That's what our banking system, our macro system, is doing. And then, of course, we can think about the opportunities that we've missed as far as investment because we haven't had the money, because we've had to go to Wall Street to borrow our own money, in some cases back, to finance it. And then, of course, as I said before, the cost of things rise because of the charge of interest. So, in fact, when you look at what that has extracted from cities and counties around the country, the Action Center for Race and Equality, ACRE, out in Chicago, reports that over $160 billion per year goes to Wall Street interests of various types for financing costs. And that doesn't include what Wall Street is making off of our pension fund money. So we see that public banking then becomes not only a desirable option, it really would seem to be critical in our self-defense, and also for us to be able to start to realize those objectives that we want civically and personally. So driving public or community outcomes definitely enables new outcomes if we're controlling the money. It's a little like a converse notion of, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. The converse of that might be, imagine what we could have had if we kept our money at home to invest in ourselves. That's the vision that drives public banking. And while it's only one dimension of the benefit of having control of our money, it's a very important one that we find a way to break free of the constraints of Wall Street and its influence. Democratizing our money through public banks opens up a lot of innovative opportunities for social system problem solving, like affordable housing and low-cost mortgages, permanent low-cost mortgages, some new cooperative initiatives, new community projects, environmental reclamation, educational opportunity expansion. It's a very long list. I'm sure you could add many favorites of your own. But what we need to do is have a bank to finance them. And we know that Wall Street's not particularly interested. So that is our mission. Banking is a risky business. Public banking, it's certainly not a panacea. And it's going to take professional planning and excellent management and public oversight to build these new banks around the country. Now, doing that, one of the opportunities that we are looking at is that with a distributed network of public banks, we could find ourselves de facto creating a parallel Federal Reserve type resource where the states and cities can call on each other and share resources for lending, for funding, for flexibility in financing that could really make an impact in pulling the capital out of Wall Street and in moving them more into our domestic or our local money resources. So I think that's a pretty exciting prospect. You guys may know that there was a Public Banking Act bill in Congress. I believe it's coming back. It's going to be revised. AOC and Rashida Tlaib are putting that forward. But there again, another legislative initiative is afoot, as well as the NIB. So we do have game, if you will, in DC. So finally, at the heart of this is a notion that I mentioned earlier about money itself, and namely that money isn't merely a commodity. It's really about our relationships with each other, our commitments to each other, our priorities. It's about community, not just a commodity. These banks will require an aligned community vision, broad-based support, and well-connected talent. It's going to be the prime movers in this are you, people in the community who have this vision, who share the commitment, and are willing to get on with it. So thanks for this opportunity for me to just touch on this aspect of our banking reality, and looking forward to hearing what your questions might be.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you, Walt and Alphecca both again for those excellent presentations. Now is an opportunity for people to make comments and questions. I want to do this in a systematic way as possible, so I'm going to illustrate how I think the best way to do it. If you have a comment or a question for Walt or Alphecca, I just want you to write stack. So we'll create a stack of them in the chat like I did now, and that'll make it really easy for me to go down a list and not skip someone if they have their hand up. The other thing is, if we want to emphasize questions, it's okay to make comments, but if you have a comment, you're not making a question, I will cut you off after about 2 minutes. Just so you know, we don't have anyone who drones on and on and on and on. So I'm going to have it open to anybody who has any questions for our two speakers. Again, just write in the chat, put stack, and I'll know to call on you. Okay. Oh, Ruth, go ahead.
Well, thank you both. That was very good. And even though I listen to you all often, I always learn new things. And I wanted to make a comment as to make sure that people are aware that both during and after the Civil War, the National Bank was, of course, it created the transcontinental railway system, which was critical to expansion. It had some downsizes, but we're not going to talk about those now. And of course, we have Grand Coulee today in Eastern Washington, where we're experiencing drought because of the foresight of the head of the, the refinance construction corporation. So we know we have climate change coming. So these other people didn't really know. These other situations didn't look like there was such a, really challenge coming up, but we have that challenge now. So it makes it more important. I just want to make that as a comment. The question is one of the things that seems so obvious. So I want your response to the fact that what are the odds that someone in government, when the next time we have these collapses, whether it's SVB, some bank on Wall Street or WAMU, what are the chances of the government stepping in, taking ownership of the bank, getting it back up and running again, and then maintaining it as a public utility, as we were talking about? I mean, until we can that's one strategy, one possibility. So I just wanted to throw that out. I know it's slim, but I think we have to start talking about things like this that are different from what we're at. Not just believe that, we're just stuck with the options that we have. I think there are options out there that we just need to talk about, even if they're not possible in our minds today.
Yeah, well, Ruth, I love your optimism and I share your intent. And I would say that part of the public banking movement includes just what you're saying, needs to. I mean, there are, in addition to many people who feel like the economy is in much more difficult situation, precipitous situation than I do, frankly, that we should be talking about alternatives. And when the next banks fall, what is going to create an environment in which nationalizing these failed institutions can take place? I think it's going to be the people. It's going to be the grassroots. It's going to have to be an uprising that will say, look, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. We just, now obviously the Federal Reserve and the Department of Justice, as Manand and Ricks pointed out, are inside game power structures. And so the public banking movement is beginning to build the kind of a cohesive entity that can speak to these difficulties that keep us locked into their profit-making game. Alphecca, what do you think about the prospect of nationalizing in response?
Well, I like to think about, I think it's very useful, and you've done a great job, Walt, at going through some of this history of how we got here, why our Wall Street and commercial banks are not operating as they should. And it's essentially a lot of influence from Wall Street in American regulation and even in the Federal Reserve, in the appointments to the Treasury Department, to the FDIC, all of that. There has only been one person, for example, in the Fed that's spoken out about within the Fed system that has spoken out about this lack of proper regulation, and that is Tom Honig, who was the St. Louis, I think, Fed head
Yeah.
at one point too. And so I asked him one time, what do you think it would take just to reinstall Glass-Steagall? Only that, to separate commercial banks, lending operations, normal lending operations from all the speculative derivatives and that kind of thing that they're doing, and reseparate the investment houses from the banking system. What would it take? What would, in your view, would it take just to do that one thing? And he said it would probably take a full, complete financial meltdown of the banking system again, as happened in 2008. That's very disconcerting, because I think Wall Street is so embedded that they know if they take too much risk, if they ride up against the edge of the wave, that the federal government will always come along and back them out, and the taxpayer will pay for it. And so that's a lot of corporate influence there. That's just that's going to push against the ability to have a really grassroots making a public utility out of banking. So the way around that, I guess, is to do what the Public Banking Institute is suggesting, which is to work from the edges and see if you can get public banks installed. And by the way, if we have another banking crisis, the Dodd-Frank Act, which was passed 12 years ago now, that was, according to President Obama, was supposed to prevent us from ever having another financial crisis and another bailout of banks, is not working. It's, as you say, it's been whittled away, and it could be that we're in the buildup now to another financial crisis. It's a domino effect. All the banks are very much interlinked with each other. They don't understand if you have a derivative, or if you have a short position, or if you're lending to a merger, or any of those kind of things, how that could go badly wrong. You saw an example of it with Credit Suisse going down the tubes because it lent out to margin dealers for Pegasus or whatever that thing was called. But our office of the comptroller of the currency and the financial stability report are supposed to be monitoring these things, and they're not really doing their job. Finally, under the Biden administration, they're saying, look, all your bonds have gone down in value, so you need to bring in more capital to backstop your loans. And the banks are pushing really hard against all of that. So if the whole thing melts down again, then what are we going to do? We're going to need to have some things around, like a national infrastructure bank to keep on lending for infrastructure, or we have to really think fundamentally about, scrapping the whole Federal Reserve statute and starting over again. But there's still a lot of corporate power and influence there that's working against fundamentally refurbishing our system. For example, the monetary, what is it called, Walt? The American Monetary Institute? Is that
AMI.
Yeah, they're the ones that are promoting the idea that maybe we should take over deposits, make them public, maybe put them with the Federal Reserve or something, but take them away from banks. It's good. We need to think about money as a public utility, as Walt says. But can we do it? Can we pass the legislation? And it's going to be a really uphill slog.
Thank you. I see another question in the stack for Aruna. Is the question just, is this going to be recorded and the slides going to be available, or did you have something else that you wanted to contribute?
No, I just wanted to know about that.
Sure. So I mentioned before at the beginning that we are recording this. It's going to be up on our Facebook channel for Washingtonians for Public Banking. So if you want to share this talk and or want to review it again, you'll have that opportunity. Also, we don't have access to the slides. I don't personally have access to slides, but if Alphecca and Walt are generous enough to share their slides with us, we can make those available as well.
Without another question, I'd just like to continue with Alphecca's point, because I think it's really germane to the gist of what are the crises, and perhaps in addition to the specific types of crises that we touched on here. The biggest one is that the fundamental basis for our banking utility is private profit and corporate ownership. And as Senator Dick Durbin says, the banks own the place, relative speaking of Congress. And so it's more than disconcerting. It's very troubling, especially when you look at the prospects that could be coming down the road relative to sudden needs for cash to speak to and recover from the kind of environmental challenges that we're seeing. And of course, then if we're driven by heartstrings, as we should be, we want to see some progress with the people who have no place to live. And with the people who have to have fair treatment at employment and safety and so forth. These are fundamentals of a first world country, it seems to me. And of course the evidence of the distance between those who have a great deal and those who have nothing is just getting bigger. So we're on a rail that's taking us very far away from where we want to go. Which is why this movement, I think, especially, I don't know, Alphecca, but talking about it tonight in this way, I think it's more important than ever that we get our neighbors to get on board with the NIB thing. We need a big bank and we need a local bank. Listen, man, in Washington, you know, God bless him. Bob Hasagawa has been at this since 2011. And has been turned down by your legislature over and over again. He's not the only guy, of course. You know, Cooter and many others are involved. But when you look at why his initiatives haven't succeeded, I think you scratch that a little bit and you see very well that there's a banking association behind it and a variety of other private interests that are keeping that democratic initiative from going through. You know, that's enough to make you mad.
Do you have any other questions for the group? Ruth, I guess you have a comment. Do you want to share the comment? And then Aruna has another question. You can go ahead.
Oh, I just, because I was looking it up earlier, there's an Italian socialist that coined the phrase more or less to have pessimism of the intellect. In other words, to see the world as it really is, and it can be pretty daunting, but to still have optimism of the will, so that you are willing to continue to act and make the world more in the direction that you want it to be. And I guess one quick thing going back to in science, you do a lot of modeling and you model different scenarios. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to model, take any bank, one of the failed banks, and model what would have happened if the government had taken it over and straightened it out, just as a scenario. I'm wondering how difficult that might be to do. And Alphecca, you might know the answer to that, or know people who might be able to do that.
Well, I know what happens when a regulator comes in and closes a bank. They just seize everything, and then they try and divvy up the assets, whatever's left over after they pay off the debtors and that kind of thing. And then they try and take all the good loans and those kind of things, and they try and move it to another bank. Typically, they sell all that stuff to a large bank. And when you do that, all you're doing is increasing the concentration in banking and putting it in those deposits now in charge of banks that are not even using them very well. So there's not a whole lot of public good in that. We also need to do better at our regulation and not keep getting them watered down. Our water regulators are there for a reason. Banks need regulation, that's for sure. So, but the idea of a public entity to lend for better projects than, for example, we have a regulation in our NIB legislation, no derivatives. We might do derivatives for hedging for interest rate increases or something like that, but we're not going to do derivatives. We want to lend to the real sector. And even if it gives a lower rate of return, or we can provide lower cost financing, that's for sure. This has a huge public good. And the huge public good is it gives people great jobs, and grows the economy, and it'll bring in more tax receipts. So altogether, I credit the I don't know what to do with the problem with banks starts higher than just when they fail and we have to take them over. As Walt has really adeptly laid out, it has to do with the very top structure of the banking system. And we're not all together. When these banks create money, it's not going into the real sector, it's going into speculation and bidding up asset prices. And that includes housing, which is a big problem of our housing crisis. So we have a big picture item, The question is, can we wrench away some of that from the private commercial banking system? Do we need a new Glass-Steagall? How can we, strengthen regulations? How can we keep reminding the administration, don't hire these people to be in the Treasury Secretary and in the FDIC and in other places like that? We need watchdogs to watch the banks, and putting the fox in charge of the henhouse doesn't really cut it. So all of this will need a new Wall Street on parade, but also a Wall Street watchdog to push the government on that side as well.
And so next I have in the chat, Aruna, you have a comment, and then after that I have Catherine.
Yes, I was wondering, with the housing crisis across the nation, how can we convince our legislators at the national level and at the state level to consider the public banking as an alternative to address the housing need? Because that is a simpler question than what Ruth is asking. Of course, I don't know a lot about banking regulation, but I'm just wondering about everyday problem. Thank you.
I particularly have thought a lot about the housing crisis. I mean, I just keep looking into it all over and over and over and over again. I mean, there's pictures of tent cities in San Francisco that they're shoveling away with bulldozers, and Washington State and Los Angeles and San Diego, all, it's endemic everywhere. People sleeping in their cars because they've been evicted. Children with no place to live. They can't even go to school because they don't have a place to go to school from. This is not a situation for a first world country. We cannot call ourselves a first world country if we're in this kind of situation. And how do we get there? Mostly by letting private real estate run the real estate market. And we need to not only come up with financing directed at affordable housing for people that need it the most, but we need to wrench away some of the real estate market. Maybe cities need to take over and have land trust and land grants and those kind of things to have a better model for providing not only financing it, the bank will finance it, but we need to have a better local land use model for providing the affordable housing and making sure that it stays sustainable. It doesn't require a budget outlay or anything like that. The worst slum landlord in the United States is the U.S. government. They own a whole bunch of tower housing in New York State that's full of mold and not even safe, rats and everything. I mean, that's just wrong because they haven't even put in their own money to maintain their own real estate. So you want to look at a great model. The one I love the most is Vienna, Austria, where half of the housing in the city is public housing, and it is shared among middle income people and low income people, and everybody is guaranteed a place to live. And it's beautiful housing too. And they built it in the 1930s, and it's still, after the Blitz and everything, and it's still in use in great shape today. London hasn't done so well. They built a lot of it, but they're letting it go public. They're letting it go into private hands. And so the number of units is dwindling. But gentrification, having people with higher incomes bid up prices for real estate that takes affordable housing away from the people that need it the most. That's something that we have to push against as well. So we need a better model for affordable housing, and it can be done. I think it can be done.
Yeah, and if I may, I'd just like to add to that. I think that the market that drives real estate is, as Alphecca said, is exactly the thing that keeps housing unaffordable. Now, what could a public bank do? Locally, I think some pretty exciting things. First of all, the public bank, under every circumstance needs to have very vigorous, insightful public advisory support and oversight. It has to be transparent. It has to have a vision of its own, and it needs to be carefully watched. What could it do? Well, under that sort of a framework, it could take some of the available land that it has, that might be in a land trust or community land trust. There are a variety of, as Alphecca said, there are a variety of vehicles that could allow us to get into a new approach to affordable housing. Too often, it's considered to be just one of those sectors where you're able to, they've got some money for affordable housing and they give to the typical developers who qualify for that money. Well, we need to have much more creative approach to that, where the communities can get involved and begin to own and think about holistically their community. I think that a public bank, that is to say, a financing vehicle that is owned by the city or the state, is the vehicle to pull that off. Now, I didn't say bank that last time because in Philadelphia, they have creating a public bank was not going to be allowed by the state. So they went to into a municipal financial authority. They did a workaround, and I'm recommending this for anybody who's interested in it, is to look at how a municipality, which uses its money in a whole host of ways to promote various outcomes and socially beneficial outcomes, it could create a financial authority that would be a vehicle to take city dollars and move it into some of these purposeful lending vehicles. One of the associations might be that we use the credit unions, community banks, and minority depositories inside the town to be able to execute, to be the front office for, to be responsible lenders to this housing agenda. So there, if we have a bank, we've got all kinds of new opportunities.
Great. And the next person I have on the stack was Kristen. And I'm afraid that this probably will be our last question for the night.
Was it Kristen or
Oh,
Catherine?
sorry, Catherine. Catherine is meant to say.
Okay.
I meant to say Catherine.
Well, that's okay. My question, I guess, is because I thought this was going to be more about the public banking in Washington, and I'm curious how things are going with Bob Hasagawa's bill for public banking and how we can best support that to try to move it through. I'm currently on the board of a group called Whole Washington, and we're fighting for universal health care for everyone in Washington that would be financed at the state level. And I think it would be great for all of our healthcare dollars to go into a public bank rather than into any kind of a commercial bank.
If Walt and Alphecca, if you don't mind, I guess that question is more for us in our organization.
Sure.
So there is the next legislative session, there is going to be another public banking bill. It's actually a public infrastructure bank for municipal, local, and tribal governments. We are going to have a coalition meeting about that on December 13th that we're going to advertise, start advertising for tomorrow, that we invite all of the local leaders that we've been connecting with, along with our membership, or the people, our supporters who are on our email list. If you're interested in getting updates about that, I would strongly recommend you go to our website, waforpublicbanking.org. It was put in the chat earlier, and you can sign up for our email list. The bill is not actually introduced by Senator Hasagawa. He's very supportive of it, but it's actually being introduced by Patty Cooter. And we have scheduled with her to talk about the bill in January. January 10th is another event that we're going to have. It's going to be a virtual town hall like this one. She'll be able to go over the specifics of the bill, why it's drafted the way it is, and you'll be able to question her and ask comments on it and stuff like that. But Washington for Public Banking is an organization that was formed in March of 2022. So we're just about over a year old, and we're going strong to try to bring this issue to the top of everyone's policy agenda.
Awesome. Thank you.
So we are about time, unless there's any final comments from our speakers, Alphecca or Walt, if you would like to say anything before we close up.
Just to say that if you would like personally to support HR 4052, one way to do that is just to call your local member of Congress and ask them to sign on to the bill. That'd be very helpful. We also, our webpage has got a lot of materials if you want to look at it. It's nibcoalition.com.
And similarly, if you're through Alphecca, similarly, the Public Banking Institute is publicbankinginstitute.org has just put out a very interesting graphic that describes the difference between what the benefits of a public bank versus all of the other financing entities that are primarily active in our economy. And you'll see how those differences are stack up and how they compare with the other resources. So I invite you to check that out, plus a tremendous amount of resources on the rest of our site as well. Thank you very much for inviting us and me, and it's always good to be in Washington.
And thank you. We really appreciate your comments and sharing your wisdom. Like I said, if you're interested in being involved in this cause and this movement, please visit our website at www.wafforpublicbanking.org. We are going to have another virtual town hall in January, as I mentioned, with Patty Cooter, and then another one in March after that. These will happen for about every 2 months. And if you want to stay updated on them, make sure to visit our website and sign up for our email list, and you'll get that out there. So,
I would like to mention that I will send, I'm not fast enough to get that, the URL for that graphic, but we should send it to everyone that was on this call because it's on the PBI website. Walt, do you know what that's PBI and what are they, just /graphic or something like that to access?
I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Super.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's that should do it right there.
And that, to save the chat, you need to hit the 3 dots at the end of the. Does everyone know how to save the chat?
well, we will have it up. We can also post all the links that are in the chat on our YouTube page so people can look at it. All right, so I want to thank everyone for coming again. Thank you, speakers, and excited to see everyone join this movement and be part of this cause. Good night.
Thank you,
Thank
Walt.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Alphecca.
very much.
Great.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.